I never thought a wooden shed in my backyard would become the center of a war that nearly destroyed an entire neighborhood. But here we are. My name is David Kramer, and I have lived in Pinewood Estates in Boulder, Colorado for 8 years. I bought my house back in 2018, long before the current Homeowners Association board took over, and long before they decided to make everyone's life a living hell with their nitpicky rules. The neighborhood sits at the base of the Rocky Mountains, which means we get brutal winters. Anyone with half a brain knows you need backup power when the storms roll through, but apparently common sense was not a requirement for the HOA board. It all started on a Tuesday morning in early November. I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and checking emails before heading to my job as a software engineer, when I heard a sharp knock on my door. Through the frosted glass, I could see a woman standing there with perfect posture and an oversized purse clutched to her side like it contained nuclear launch codes. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Patricia Donovan, president of the Pinewood Estates, HOA, 52 years old, with that distinctive haircut that seemed to defy gravity and logic. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit despite the freezing temperatures, and her lips were pressed into a thin line that suggested she had just tasted something unpleasant. "David Kramer," she said, even though she knew exactly who I was. We had lived in the same neighborhood for 3 years at this point. "Patricia, what can I do for you?" She pulled out a folder from her purse and flipped it open with theatrical precision. "I am here on behalf of the HOA board to inform you that you are in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines. You have erected an unauthorized structure on your property without board approval." I blinked at her. "What are you talking about? The shed?" "In your backyard. It violates our aesthetic guidelines and was not approved by the Architectural Review Committee." I felt my jaw clench. That shed has been there for 2 months. I built it to house my backup generator. You know, in case the power goes out during one of our famous Colorado blizzards. Patricia's expression did not change. "Regardless of your reasoning, the structure was not approved. You have 30 days to remove it, or the HOA will begin fining you $200 per day until compliance is achieved. You cannot be serious." "I am always serious when it comes to maintaining property values, Mr. Kramer. The shed is an eyesore. It is visible from the Hendersons' second-floor bathroom window, and they have filed a complaint. The Hendersons can see into my backyard from their bathroom window. Maybe they should stop looking." Patricia snapped the folder shut. "You have 30 days. Good morning." She turned on her heel and marched back to her silver Lexus like a general leaving a battlefield. I stood there in my doorway, cold air rushing past me, absolutely stunned. The shed was not even visible from the street. It was a simple 10 by 12-foot structure, painted forest green to blend in with the surrounding trees. I had spent 3 weekends building it myself, making sure it was sturdy and weatherproof. Inside was my Honda generator, fuel cans, and some basic emergency supplies. It was practical, necessary, and completely reasonable. But apparently, reasonable did not factor into Patricia Donovan's world. I called my neighbor, Frank Morrison, a retired electrician who had lived in Pinewood Estates since it was built in 2003. He picked up on the second ring. "Frank, it is David. Can I ask you something about the HOA? Oh boy, what did Patricia do now? She is demanding I tear down my generator shed, says it is not approved and violates aesthetic guidelines." Frank let out a long whistle. "Yeah, that sounds like her. She has been on a power trip ever since she became president. Last month she tried to fine the Chens because their Christmas lights were allegedly the wrong shade of white. The wrong shade of white, David. Can she actually fine me $200 a day? If it is in the CC and Artiques, yeah. But here is the thing. When they revised the guidelines 2 years ago, a bunch of us voted against it. The meeting was held during a weekday afternoon when most people were at work. Only about 15% of residents actually voted. I am not even sure it was legal. That got my attention. So what you are saying is, the current rules might not be legitimate. I am saying you might want to get a lawyer and check. Patricia and her crew, they do not like being challenged, but they also cut a lot of corners to get their way. I thanked Frank and hung up. Then I did what any reasonable person would do in 2025. I started researching Colorado HOA laws. I spent my lunch break reading through statutes and legal precedents, and what I found made my blood boil. According to Colorado revised statutes, any amendment to HOA governing documents required a vote of at least 51% of all homeowners, not just those present at a meeting. If Frank was right about the low turnout, the entire revision might be invalid. But I also knew that fighting an HOA was expensive and time-consuming. These battles could drag on for years, racking up legal fees that dwarfed any potential fines. I had heard horror stories from colleagues who had been bankrupted by HOA disputes. I needed to be smart about this. That evening, I printed out copies of the Colorado statutes and highlighted the relevant sections. Then, I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, citing the legal issues with their revised guidelines, and requesting a full audit of the vote that had approved them. I hand-delivered it to Patricia's mailbox the next morning, making sure to take a photo of the timestamp for my records. 3 days later, I received a response. Not from Patricia, but from the HOA's lawyer, a man named Gregory Walsh from a firm in downtown Boulder. The letter was brief and threatening. It stated that my concerns had been reviewed and found to be without merit, that the HOA's guidelines were legally binding, and that failure to comply would result in immediate fines and potential legal action, including a lien on my property. A lien. They were threatening to put a lien on my house over a garden shed. I called Frank again. They sent me a letter from their lawyer. They are threatening a lien. Jesus. Patricia really does not like being told no. Listen, there is a community meeting next week. You should come and bring this up publicly. A lot of folks are getting tired of her act. Maybe if enough people push back, the board will back down. The meeting was held at the Pinewood Estates Clubhouse, a small building near the community pool that always smelled vaguely of chlorine. I arrived 15 minutes early and found about 30 residents already there, most of them older couples who had been in the neighborhood for decades. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members. Treasurer Ronald Schmidt, a balding accountant who looked perpetually nervous, and Secretary Linda Hayes, a mousy woman who seemed to exist solely to nod at everything Patricia said. I took a seat in the third row, right behind Frank. He gave me an encouraging nod. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we will be discussing several important matters, including upcoming holiday decoration guidelines and snow removal protocols. But first, I would like to address a concerning matter regarding resident compliance. She looked directly at me. It has come to the board's attention that one of our residents has been spreading misinformation about the legitimacy of our community guidelines. I want to make it abundantly clear that all current rules and regulations were properly approved and are legally binding. Any resident who refuses to comply will face the consequences outlined in our governing documents. My face got hot. She was calling me out without using my name, but everyone knew who she meant. Frank stood up. Patricia, I think what David is asking for is reasonable transparency. A lot of us were not aware of the vote that approved the current guidelines. Could you provide documentation showing how many residents participated? Patricia's smile was icy. The vote was properly conducted and recorded. If residents choose not to participate in community governance, that is their choice, but it does not invalidate the process. How many people voted? I asked, standing up. That information is in the meeting minutes, which are available upon request. I am requesting it right now. Ronald, the treasurer, shuffled some papers nervously. Patricia, maybe we should just provide the numbers. Patricia shot him a look that could have stripped paint. The exact numbers are not relevant to tonight's discussion. We are here to talk about community matters, not to relitigate settled issues. 23, Ronald said quietly. Patricia turned to him sharply. Ronald. 23 residents voted to approve the guideline revisions, he continued, his voice getting slightly stronger. Out of 147 households. The room erupted. People started talking over each other, voices rising in anger and confusion. Patricia banged her gavel, but the noise only got louder. Frank stood up again, his face red. That is less than 16%. How the hell is that a legitimate vote? The vote was conducted according to the procedures outlined in our bylaws, Patricia said, her voice tight. Residents were notified via email 3 weeks in advance. During August, someone shouted from the back. Half the neighborhood was on vacation, and the meeting was at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, another voice added. Most people were at work. I watched Patricia's face grow more and more pinched as the room turned against her. Linda, the secretary, was frantically taking notes, while Ronald looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Finally, Patricia stood up and slammed her hand on the table. Enough. This board was elected to make decisions on behalf of this community, and that is exactly what we are doing. If you do not like it, you are free to run for the board during the next election cycle. Until then, the guidelines stand, and they will be enforced. Mr. Kramer, you have 24 days left to remove your unauthorized structure. This meeting is adjourned. She gathered her papers and walked out, leaving Linda and Ronald to deal with the angry crowd. I sat back down, my heart pounding. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. Well, you stirred the hornet's nest. That is more than I have seen people fired up in years. Over the next week, I became something of an accidental neighborhood activist. People stopped me during my morning runs to share their own HOA horror stories. The Chens told me about the Christmas light incident. The Johnsons described being fined for having the wrong style of mailbox. Mrs. Kowalski, a 78-year-old widow, tearfully explained how she had been cited for having a vegetable garden that was apparently against the aesthetic guidelines, even though she had been growing tomatoes in her backyard for 15 years. I started documenting everything. I created a spreadsheet with every complaint, every fine, and every violation notice issued in the past 2 years. The pattern was clear. Patricia and her board had systematically targeted anyone who did not fall in line, using fines and violations as weapons to enforce their control. Several families had even sold their homes and moved away rather than deal with the constant harassment. I reached out to a lawyer, Maria Gonzalez, who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed my documentation and the vote records that Ronald had finally provided after I submitted a formal written request. This is egregious, she said, sitting across from me in her office in downtown Boulder. The Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act is very clear about voting requirements. They needed at least 75 homeowners to vote yes for this amendment to be valid, and they got 23. This is textbook procedural violation. So what can I do? We can challenge the validity of the entire guideline revision in court. If we win, it reverts back to the previous version, which I assume was less restrictive. Much less. The old guidelines basically just said keep your lawn mowed and do not paint your house neon green. Then that is your play. But I need to be honest with you, David. This will not be quick or cheap. HOA litigation can drag on for a year or more, and legal fees can easily hit $20,000 or $30,000. Even if you win, collecting attorney's fees from the HOA can be difficult. I sat back in the chair, feeling the weight of the decision. $30,000. That was a significant chunk of my savings, but the alternative was tearing down a structure I needed, paying ongoing fines, or selling my house and moving. None of those options were acceptable. Let me think about it, I said. That night, the first snow of the season started falling. I stood at my back window, watching the flakes accumulate on my generator shed, and made my decision. I was not going to back down. The next morning, I called Maria and told her to file the lawsuit. Patricia received the court papers on a Friday. By Saturday morning, I had a new certified letter from the HOA. They were implementing immediate fines of $200 per day, starting that Monday, for my failure to remove the shed. They were also filing a countersuit against me for harassment and defamation. They are trying to bury you in legal costs, Maria explained when I called her in a panic. It is a common intimidation tactic, but here is the good news. Their countersuit is baseless. You have not harassed anyone and you have not made any defamatory statements. A judge will throw it out in preliminary hearings. Their lawyer knows this. He is just trying to scare you into settling. It is working, I admitted. Do not let them win, David. We have a strong case. Trust the process. Trusting the process was easier said than done when I was being charged $200 a day. I did the math. Even if the case took 6 months, that was over $36,000 in fines on top of legal fees. I could fight the fines later, but if I lost, I would be liable for all of it. I started losing sleep. I would lie awake at night, running through scenarios, calculating costs, wondering if I had made a catastrophic mistake. My work performance started to slip. My manager pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home. Just dealing with some HOA issues, I said. He laughed. Oh man, I feel you. We dealt with our HOA for 3 years before we finally gave up and moved. Those people are like vampires. They will bleed you dry. That was not what I needed to hear. Then, in mid-December, something unexpected happened. The local news picked up the story. A reporter named Jennifer Wu from Denver 7 News had been doing a series on HOA abuses across Colorado, and someone had tipped her off about Pinewood Estates. She called me and asked if I would be willing to do an interview. I hesitated. Going public could escalate things, but it could also put pressure on the HOA to back down. I called Maria first. Do it, she said immediately. Public pressure is one of the few things HOA boards actually respond to. They hate bad publicity. The interview aired on a Thursday evening. Jennifer was professional and thorough, explaining the legal issues with the vote and showing footage of my shed, which looked completely innocuous on camera. She interviewed Frank and several other neighbors who shared their own stories. The segment ended with her standing in front of Pinewood Estates' entrance sign, saying, HOA boards are meant to serve their communities, not rule them like dictatorships. Residents here say they just want common sense and fairness, but instead they are getting fines, threats, and legal battles. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The story went viral on social media. Local Reddit threads exploded with people sharing their own HOA nightmares. The Denver Post picked it up. By Friday morning, there were news vans parked outside Patricia's house, and the HOA office. Patricia did not handle the attention well. She gave a disastrous interview where she came across as petty and vindictive, insisting that rules were rules and that she was just trying to maintain property values. When Jennifer asked her about the 23-vote issue, Patricia snapped that people who did not vote had no right to complain, which made her look even worse. The story probably would have died down after a few days, but then winter hit hard. Colorado had been experiencing a warmer-than-average fall, but the Weather Service started warning about a major storm system moving in from the Pacific. They were calling it a potential once-in-a-decade blizzard, with forecasts predicting up to 3 feet of snow and wind gusts over 70 miles per hour. The governor issued a state of emergency, and everyone started preparing. I made sure my generator shed was stocked and ready. I filled the fuel cans, tested the generator, and laid in supplies of food, water, and batteries. Frank came over and we went through a checklist together, making sure I had everything I might need if the power went out for an extended period. "This is going to be bad," Frank said, looking at the darkening sky. "I have lived here 20 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times I have seen the Weather Service this worried." The storm hit on a Tuesday night, 3 days before Christmas. I was home, watching the news when the power flickered once, twice, then died completely. Outside, the wind was howling like a living thing, driving snow sideways with such force that I could not see more than a few feet beyond my windows. The temperature was already dropping fast. According to my phone, which was rapidly draining battery, it was -5 degrees and falling. I pulled on my heavy coat, boots, and gloves, then fought my way to the backyard. The wind nearly knocked me over twice. Snow had already drifted 3 feet high against the shed, but the door still opened. Inside, protected from the elements, my generator sat ready. I checked the fuel, primed the engine, and pulled the starter cord. It roared to life on the second pull, a beautiful sound in the chaos of the storm. I connected the transfer switch I had installed, and within minutes I had power again. Lights, heat, refrigerator, internet. I was safe and comfortable while the blizzard raged outside. Not everyone was so lucky. The next morning the storm was still going strong. I looked out to see a white wasteland. Cars were buried. Trees had been knocked down by the wind. Power lines were hanging loose, covered in ice. According to the news, over 200,000 people in the Boulder area were without power, and the utility company was saying it could be days or even weeks before everyone was restored. My phone rang. It was Frank. "David, thank God. Are you okay?" "I am fine. Generator is running perfectly." "You?" "Same. I still have my old backup system from when I was working. But listen, we have a problem. A lot of folks in the neighborhood do not have power, and it is getting dangerous. The Chens have a newborn baby. Mrs. Kowalski has medical equipment that needs electricity. The Johnsons' pipes are already freezing. People are starting to panic. What about the clubhouse? Does it have power?" "No, and even if it did, Patricia locked it up tight before the storm. I tried calling her, but her phone goes straight to voicemail. I think she might have evacuated to her daughter's place in Denver before the storm hit." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "So she is not even here?" "Nope. And neither is Ronald or Linda. The whole board bailed before it got bad." I thought about that for a moment. Patricia, who was so obsessed with property values and community standards, had abandoned the neighborhood when people actually needed leadership. Meanwhile, the shed she had tried to force me to tear down was currently keeping me alive. "Bring people here," I said. "Anyone who needs power or heat." I have enough generator capacity to run space heaters and charge phones. It is not much, but it is better than nothing. "Are you sure?" Yes, spread the word. Within an hour, my house became an unofficial emergency shelter. The Chens arrived with their baby bundled in layers of blankets. Mrs. Kowalski came with her portable oxygen concentrator, which Frank helped set up in my living room. The Johnsons brought their elderly dog, who was shivering uncontrollably. More neighbors trickled in throughout the day, all of them desperate and grateful. I ran extension cords from my generator to power space heaters in different rooms. People huddled together, sharing body heat and stories. Someone had brought a portable camping stove, and we made soup and coffee. My house, which was normally quiet and empty, was suddenly filled with 20 people, all of us bound together by the crisis. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of relentless snow and wind, of sub-zero temperatures and white-out conditions. The utility company could not even begin repairs because it was too dangerous to send crews out. We hunkered down, rationing supplies, keeping the generator running in shifts and checking on each other constantly. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The sun came out, blindingly bright on the snow, and the temperature climbed to a balmy 10 degrees. We ventured outside to assess the damage. It was catastrophic. Trees down everywhere, roofs collapsed under the weight of snow, cars completely buried. Our street looked like a disaster zone. And still no power. I checked the generator fuel. I was running low, but Frank had some extra cans in his garage. We transferred the fuel carefully, making sure we had enough to last another few days if necessary. People started slowly returning to their homes to check on damage, but many came back to my house because it was the only warm place available. On the 5th day, Patricia finally reappeared. Her Lexus pulled up to my house, which now had a steady stream of neighbors coming and going. She got out, looking furious, and marched up to my front door. I saw her through the window and met her outside, not wanting to let her venom into the space where people felt safe. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, her perfectly styled hair somehow intact despite the disaster around us. "Helping people. You know, community service. You might want to try it sometime. You are running an illegal operation out of your home. This is a residential neighborhood, not a homeless shelter." I stared at her, genuinely stunned. People were freezing. There was no power. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to follow proper emergency protocols and wait for official assistance. Official assistance? Where were you, Patricia? Where was the board? You all ran off to Denver and left everyone here to fend for themselves. Her face flushed. I have family obligations, and for your information, I was monitoring the situation remotely. Monitoring. Right. Well, while you were monitoring, people here were in danger. Mrs. Kowalski needed power for her oxygen. The Chens had a 2-month-old baby, but I guess that is not as important as aesthetic guidelines, right? This is not over, Mr. Kramer. You are still in violation of HOA rules and you are still accumulating daily fines. In fact, I am adding additional violations for running an unauthorized commercial operation and exceeding visitor parking limits. She turned and walked back to her car, nearly slipping on the ice. I watched her drive away, and something inside me snapped. I pulled out my phone and called Jennifer Wu at Denver 7 News. "Jennifer, it is David Kramer from Pinewood Estates. Remember that HOA story you covered? I have a hell of an update for you." The second news segment aired 2 days later, just as power was being restored to the neighborhood. This time, Jennifer interviewed multiple residents who had sheltered at my house during the storm. Mrs. Kowalski cried on camera, explaining how my generator had kept her oxygen concentrator running and probably saved her life. The Chens showed footage they had taken on their phones of people huddled in my living room, the generator humming in the background. Frank gave a scathing interview about HOA leadership abandoning the community in a crisis. And then Jennifer dropped the hammer. She revealed that Patricia Donovan had not only left before the storm, but had been issuing new violation notices during the emergency, including fines for residents whose mailboxes had been damaged by falling tree limbs. The optics were devastating. The backlash was immediate and severe. Local politicians got involved. The Boulder City Council announced an investigation into HOA governance practices. The state attorney general's office sent a letter to Pinewood Estates requesting all records related to the guideline vote and subsequent enforcement actions. Multiple residents filed formal complaints with the Colorado HOA Information Office. Patricia tried to weather the storm, literally and figuratively. She called an emergency board meeting to address the controversy, but over 100 residents showed up and they were angry. Really angry. People shouted her down when she tried to speak. Someone had printed out copies of all the violation notices issued during the blizzard and was handing them out. Ronald, the treasurer, resigned on the spot, saying he could not in good conscience continue supporting the board's actions. Linda, the secretary, tried to defend Patricia, arguing that rules existed for a reason and that exceptions could not be made, even in emergencies. That went over about as well as expected. Someone threw a wadded-up piece of paper at her. Security had to escort both Patricia and Linda out of the clubhouse for their own safety. 1 week later, a recall petition began circulating. Colorado law allowed homeowners to recall HOA board members with a vote of at least 30% of residents. The petition hit that threshold in less than 48 hours. It ultimately gathered signatures from over 70% of the neighborhood, an unprecedented show of unity. Patricia fought it, of course. She hired a lawyer and argued that the recall was procedurally invalid, that the petition had not been properly formatted, that the voting period was too short. But she had lost all credibility, and the community was done with her games. The recall vote was held in mid-January, conducted by an independent third party to ensure fairness. Patricia, Linda, and the remaining board member were removed by a vote of 93%. An interim board was appointed, led by Frank, and their first action was to suspend all pending violation notices and fines pending a comprehensive review of the guidelines. Their second action was to formally apologize to the residents who had been targeted by the previous board. I still had my lawsuit pending against the HOA regarding the invalid vote. With the new board in place, Maria reached out to their interim legal counsel and proposed a settlement. The HOA would formally acknowledge that the guideline revision had been improperly approved, revert to the previous version, and waive all fines and legal fees. In exchange, I would drop the suit. It was a good deal, and I took it. The final piece came in February, when the Colorado Attorney General's office completed their investigation. They found multiple violations of state HOA laws, including improper voting procedures, failure to maintain adequate financial records, and misuse of HOA funds. Apparently, Patricia had been using HOA money to pay for personal expenses, including her car payments and a timeshare in Breckenridge. The amount was over $40,000. That crossed the line from civil dispute into criminal territory. The Attorney General referred the matter to the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, and criminal charges were filed. Patricia Donovan was arrested in early March and charged with theft, embezzlement, and fraud. Linda Hayes was charged as an accessory for helping to conceal the financial irregularities. The arrest was, predictably, covered by local news. I watched the footage of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs, and I felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. This whole nightmare had consumed nearly 5 months of my life. I had spent thousands of dollars on legal fees, lost countless hours of sleep, and nearly destroyed my mental health, all because someone could not stand the idea of a generator shed in a backyard. Patricia eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, followed by probation and restitution to the HOA. Linda got probation and community service. Ronald, who had cooperated with investigators, was not charged. The new HOA board, officially elected in April, implemented sweeping reforms. They established clear, reasonable guidelines that focused on genuine health and safety issues rather than aesthetic micromanagement. They created a transparent voting system that required electronic balloting with verified participation thresholds. They opened up the financial records for regular audits, and they passed a specific provision protecting backup generators and emergency preparedness equipment. My generator shed, the structure that started everything, remained exactly where it was. Life slowly returned to normal. The neighborhood seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. People were friendlier, more willing to help each other. The Chens invited me over for dinner to thank me properly for helping during the blizzard. Mrs. Kowalski baked me cookies every week for 2 months. Frank became one of my closest friends. I learned later that property values in Pinewood estates had actually increased after Patricia's removal. Turns out that people valued reasonable governance and community spirit more than perfectly uniform mailboxes and arbitrary shed restrictions. Several families who had been considering moving decided to stay. New buyers specifically sought out the neighborhood because of its reformed HOA. In June, I was sitting on my back deck, enjoying the warm Colorado evening when my phone rang. It was Maria Gonzalez. "David, I wanted to let you know that the HOA's insurance company finally settled all the claims from Patricia's embezzlement. Every resident who was improperly fined is getting full restitution, plus interest. That is great news. And there is something else. The new board voted to give you a formal commendation for your actions during the blizzard. They are putting up a plaque in the clubhouse acknowledging residents who went above and beyond during the emergency. Your name is at the top." I did not know what to say to that. I just did what anyone would do. No, David, most people would have torn down that shed to avoid the hassle. You stood your ground on principle, and it exposed corruption that was hurting everyone. You should be proud. After we hung up, I walked out to my backyard and looked at the shed. It was still forest green, still a simple 10 by 12 structure, still completely unremarkable. But it represented something important. It represented the idea that communities should be built on mutual respect and common sense, not petty tyranny. That rules should serve people, not the other way around. That standing up to bullies, even when it is expensive and exhausting and scary, sometimes really does matter. The generator sat inside, quiet now, waiting for the next emergency. And I knew it would be ready, just like I would be ready, because that is what you do in a real community. You prepare, you help your neighbors, and you refuse to let small-minded people make your decisions for you. A year later, almost to the day, I was interviewed again by Jennifer Wu for a follow-up segment on HOA reform in Colorado. She asked me if I thought the whole ordeal had been worth it. I thought about that question carefully. I thought about the stress, the legal bills, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety. I thought about Patricia in jail, Linda doing community service, the neighborhood divided and angry. All of that pain and conflict over a garden shed. But I also thought about Mrs. Kowalski, safe and warm with her oxygen running during the blizzard. The Chen's baby, protected from the deadly cold. Frank and the dozens of other residents who had been freed from arbitrary harassment. The new families moving in, choosing our neighborhood specifically because they knew they would be treated fairly. Yes, I told Jennifer, it was worth it, because it was never really about the shed. It was about whether we were going to let fear and intimidation control our lives, or whether we were going to stand up for what is right. And I am glad we chose to stand up. The segment ended with footage of a neighborhood barbecue the new HOA board had organized, showing families laughing together, kids playing, people actually enjoying their community. It was a stark contrast to the tense, fearful atmosphere that had existed under Patricia's regime. I still live in Pinewood Estates. I still have my generator shed. And every winter when the snow starts falling and the wind picks up, I make sure it is fueled and ready, just in case. Because you never know when you will need it. And you never know when standing your ground on a seemingly small issue will end up changing everything. Frank retired from the HOA board after his one-year term, saying he had done his duty, and it was time for younger folks to take over. The new board has been excellent, professional without being authoritarian, organized without being oppressive. They actually listen to residents. What a concept! Last winter was mild and we did not lose power once, which meant the generator sat idle. Some people asked me if I regretted all the hassle over something I barely used. I told them the same thing I tell everyone who asks about the whole saga. The value of emergency preparedness is not measured by how often you need it, but by how ready you are when you do. Plus, I had discovered I actually liked having the shed. It gave me extra storage space for tools and outdoor equipment. I put up some shelves, organized everything neatly, even installed a small workbench. It became my little retreat, a place to tinker with projects and think. The thing Patricia had called an eyesore turned into one of my favorite features of the property. The Hendersons, whose second-floor bathroom window supposedly overlooked my shed, moved away in March for unrelated reasons. The new owners, a young couple named Travis and Emily, introduced themselves by bringing over homemade cookies and explicitly saying they could not care less about my shed. They thought it was smart to have backup power. Travis even asked for advice on installing his own generator system. That became a trend. Over the following year, 11 other households in Pinewood Estates installed backup generators. A few built sheds like mine, while others went with whole house systems or portable units. The new HOA board created simple guidelines for generator installations, focusing on safety and noise considerations rather than aesthetics. It was rational, sensible policy that served the community's actual interests. I ran into Ronald Schmidt, the former treasurer, at the grocery store one day. He looked significantly less stressed than the last time I had seen him. We had an awkward but civil conversation where he apologized for his role in the whole mess. "I should have stood up to her sooner," he said, staring at his shopping cart. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I convinced myself it was easier to just go along. "I am sorry, David. You paid the price for my cowardice." I appreciated the apology, even though it could not undo the damage. Ronald had been weak, not evil. He had let Patricia bully him the same way she bullied everyone else. I told him I forgave him, and I meant it. Holding on to anger was exhausting, and I had been angry for long enough. Patricia Donovan was released from county jail after serving 14 months of her 18-month sentence, getting time off for good behavior. According to Frank, who still kept track of neighborhood gossip, she moved to Arizona immediately after her release to live with her sister. She never returned to Colorado. Her house in Pinewood Estates sold within a week at above asking price, snapped up by a family relocating from California who loved the community feel and reformed HOA. Linda Hayes stayed in Boulder but became something of a pariah. She had been so closely associated with Patricia's regime that people could not separate her from it, even though her actual crimes had been relatively minor. She eventually moved to a different neighborhood, seeking a fresh start where people did not know her history. I wish I could say that I handled all of this with perfect grace and wisdom, that I was some kind of hero who never doubted or struggled. The truth is, there were days during those dark months when I seriously considered just tearing down the shed and ending the whole thing. The stress was crushing. I snapped at people I cared about. I became obsessed with the case to the point where it consumed my entire life. My work suffered, my health suffered, my relationships suffered. But I kept going, partly out of stubbornness and partly because I realized early on that this was not just about me anymore. Other people were watching to see if it was possible to stand up to HOA overreach and win. If I had backed down, it would have sent a message that Patricia's tactics worked, that intimidation and harassment were effective tools for silencing dissent. I could not let that stand. The legal bills totaled $28,000 by the time everything was settled. The HOA's insurance covered most of it as part of the settlement, but I still ended up paying about $7,000 out of pocket for expenses that were not recoverable. It was a lot of money, more than I had ever spent on anything except my house and car. But I had my principal, my shed, and my peace of mind. It was an expensive lesson in standing up for yourself, but it was one I would never forget. Maria Gonzalez became something of a local celebrity lawyer after our case. She started getting referrals from all over Colorado, people who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares and wanted someone who actually understood the issues. She told me once that our case had been a turning point in her career, that it reminded her why she had gone to law school in the first place. To help people, not just to bill hours. The new HOA board asked me to serve on a committee focused on emergency preparedness for the neighborhood. After some hesitation, I agreed. We developed comprehensive plans for future severe weather events, including designated warming centers, communication protocols, and resource-sharing networks. The goal was to make sure that if another blizzard hit, we would be ready as a community, not just as individuals. During one committee meeting, someone suggested that we should have a backup generator at the clubhouse for emergency use. Everyone thought it was a great idea. I volunteered to help with the installation, and we built a small equipment shed behind the clubhouse to house it. The irony was not lost on anyone. The very thing Patricia had tried to ban was now an officially sanctioned community resource. I started dating someone in September, a woman named Rachel who worked as a veterinarian in Boulder. We met through a hiking group, and on our third date, I told her the whole HOA saga. I was nervous about how she would react, worried she might think I was some kind of obsessive weirdo who started wars over garden sheds. Instead, she laughed and said, "Good for you. I cannot stand people who think rules are more important than common sense. You did the right thing." That was when I knew I was going to marry her. We are taking things slow, but it feels right in a way nothing has for a long time. She loves Colorado as much as I do, and she thinks my generator shed is charming. That is pretty much all I need in a partner. The holidays rolled around again, bringing that familiar anxiety about winter weather. But this time, when the forecast started predicting snow, I felt prepared rather than afraid. The generator was maintained and ready. The shed was weatherproofed. I had supplies stocked. And I knew that if things got bad, I had a community of neighbors who would help each other rather than tear each other down. We did get a significant snowstorm in late December, though nothing like the previous year's blizzard. The power stayed on, thankfully, but several people called to thank me for my advocacy in getting generators approved. Knowing that they had backup power gave them peace of mind, which is worth more than any aesthetic guideline. I was cleaning out my home office in January when I found the original violation notice from Patricia, dated back in November, almost 15 months earlier. I read through it again, marveling at how something so small and petty had spiraled into such a massive conflict. 30 days to remove an unauthorized structure, $200 per day in fines, threats of legal action and liens, all because one person could not stand the idea of someone else making a practical decision about their own property. I threw the notice away. It belonged in the past, along with all the anger and fear and stress that came with it. I had better things to do than dwell on what had happened. Life was moving forward, and I was moving with it. Frank hosted a Super Bowl party in February, and half the neighborhood showed up. It was the kind of gathering that would have been unthinkable under Patricia's regime, too loud and crowded and chaotic to meet her standards. But it was wonderful. People were relaxed, genuinely enjoying each other's company, not worried about being cited for noise violations or parking infractions. During halftime, Frank pulled me aside. "You know, I have been thinking about everything that happened last year. The HOA nightmare, the blizzard, all of it, and I realized something. Communities are not defined by their rules or their boards or their guidelines. They are defined by how people treat each other when things get hard, and we passed that test." He was right. We had been tested by a petty tyrant and a natural disaster, and we had come through it stronger and more united. The experience had forced us to confront what kind of neighborhood we wanted to be, and we had chosen correctly. We chose cooperation over control, compassion over compliance, community over conformity. That spring, I built a small deck addition onto my house, and this time, I went through the proper approval process with the HOA. It took exactly 1 week. I submitted my plans, the Architectural Review Committee looked them over to ensure basic safety compliance, and they approved it. No drama, no power games, no arbitrary rejections. Just a simple, rational process that respected both community standards and homeowner rights. The deck turned out great. I hosted a cookout in May to celebrate, inviting all the neighbors who had supported me during the difficult times. Mrs. Kowalski came with her famous pierogi. The Chens brought their baby, who was now a toddler running around and getting into everything. Frank manned the grill like a champion. Rachel helped coordinate everything, fitting seamlessly into the neighborhood dynamic. As I looked around at all these people, laughing and talking and enjoying a beautiful Colorado evening, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the outcome of the HOA fight, but for the connections it had forged. I had lived in Pinewood Estates for years before the whole saga, but I had never really known my neighbors. The crisis had forced us to rely on each other, and in doing so, we had built something real. That generator shed, the one Patricia had called an eyesore and tried so hard to eliminate, had literally and figuratively brought the community together. It had kept people safe during the blizzard. It had exposed corruption and abuse of power. It had sparked a movement for reform that improved life for everyone. All because I refused to back down when someone told me I could not prepare for emergencies on my own property. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just complied with Patricia's original demand. If I had torn down the shed, paid whatever fines she wanted, kept my head down and avoided conflict. The easy path, the path of least resistance. In the short term, it would have saved me money, stress, and time. But in the long term, it would have left the neighborhood under Patricia's thumb, continuing her reign of petty tyranny until either she got bored or the embezzlement got so egregious that it collapsed on its own. By standing up, by fighting back, by refusing to accept that unreasonable rules should be followed simply because they were rules, I had helped create space for change, not just for myself, but for everyone who came after. Future residents of Pinewood Estates would never know Patricia Donovan or the fear she inspired. They would just know a reasonable, well-run community with sensible guidelines and responsive leadership. That is legacy enough for me. The generator shed still stands in my backyard, painted forest green, blending in with the trees just like I designed it to. Inside, the Honda generator sits ready, maintained and tested regularly. I check it every month, run it for 30 minutes to keep the engine healthy, make sure the fuel is fresh. It is a simple routine that gives me confidence and security, and every time I walk past that shed, I remember what it represents. Not just emergency preparedness or property rights, but the fundamental idea that ordinary people can stand up to power and win, even when the odds seem stacked against them. Even when it is expensive and scary and uncertain. Even when everyone tells you to just comply and make it easy on yourself. Because some things are worth fighting for, even if they seem small or insignificant to others. Your home, your community, your right to make reasonable decisions without arbitrary interference. These are not small things at all. They are the foundation of a free and decent society. I am David Kramer, and I live in Pinewood Estates in Boulder, Colorado. I have a generator shed in my backyard, and I would do it all again.